about it. Tell me all about it. I'm here. I want to know what's on your mind. Ooh, the world needs to hear from you, and I'm so glad to have a conversation to reach the nation. And it's all about you. We'll help each other to discover innovative ways to positively change the world. Let's talk about let's talk about Conversations with Nicole.
Greetings. Happy Wednesday. Welcome to Conversations with Nicole, a talk show based in Tallahassee, Florida, focused on connecting the community through conversations. I am Nicole Everett, your host, and today is what I call Wellness Wednesday. Wellness Wednesday is an opportunity for you and me and my guests to have an interactive conversation. So if you will, as you begin to tune in, put in the comments the city and the state that you are tuning in from, the city and the state that you're tuning in from, and I will give you a shout out. We have a dynamic topic tonight, generational trauma and healing. And our guest is someone who I know her family well. Her brother, actually, and my son were really great friends in grade school together. And then her younger brother, has actually appeared on my show, McKinley Wilson. So I see you all chiming in. Let me give a pause and say hey there to Mika and Tallahassee. Thanks for tuning in. Hey there, Maine and Tally. And Tori is in Virginia. Okay, Tori. Good to see you. Thanks for watching. So, y'all, I gotta just pause for another moment to say, we gotta take care of ourselves mentally. I actually was sharing the show with someone this morning via Facebook. I sent a link, the YouTube link to the show that we had on Monday on suicide. If you missed that one, it was a really, really good show. And so this Facebook friend of mine messaged me. I had only met her once before, but she was wanting to share some personal things about herself. And so she put her number in the chat and I called her. Now, this is before 7 this morning. Okay. And so she's telling me about just some life events that were very troubling. And so, she cried a couple of times, but we got her laughing by the end of it. But I can't stress enough how important mental wellness is. And this is part of why we're doing what we're doing here with these talks on wellness and mindset, and particularly in the Black and Brown community. So please, I can't say it enough. Talk to somebody, and particularly a licensed clinician or somebody that is working on getting their licensure. Please. I connected her with some resources. I told her to text me when she when she got her appointment scheduled, because I wanted to, just follow up. And I didn't hear from her today, so I'm definitely going to follow up tomorrow and find out what happened when she called. Because there are some free resources here in Tallahassee, free mental health counseling that is available to citizens in Tallahassee at the Lincoln Center, 9 to 1, Monday through Friday. You don't have to show anything, no income, no address, no nothing. So please take advantage of these resources. All right, I'm off of my soapbox, but I just wanted to share that. All right, I see a few more folks. I just want to quickly, I'm not going to call your name, but I'm going to put you up here. Thank you for being here. Gina, your baby girl, is with me tonight. Thank you for being here. All right, so Miss Ashlei Rabess Petion is here with me tonight, and I'm going to read a little bit of her bio before I bring her on. So Ashlei is a professional mental health counselor, marriage and family therapist. and a PhD candidate in counselor education and practice. She has over 7 years of experience in mental health in the mental health profession, ranging from the National Suicide Hotline and crisis centers to community and school-based mental health care. Primarily, Ashley's clinical expertise involves working with teens and their families to promote healthy familial relationships that contribute to healthy, strong communities. And Ashley's research focuses on generational trauma and healing in Black women, which is what we will be chatting about tonight. So, help me welcome Ashley.
Hello.
Yay!
Hey, Nicole. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for being here. So, Ashley, if you would tell the folks who you are, not what you do, but who is Ashley
Yes, and thank
Petion?
you for making that distinction. I love that because
Mm-hmm,
oftentimes we define ourselves by our occupation,
mm-hmm.
or we typically leave with a job. But I am Ashlei Rabess Petion. I am a daughter. My mom is on the call here. I think my grandma might be on here too.
All right.
but
Shout out
I'm
to Grandma.
Yes, I am a sister to a number of siblings. I have a lot of siblings. You mentioned my brother was on the talk show earlier. I'm also a new wife. I'm a newlywed. My husband should be in the audience. So I like to think of myself in relation to like my relationships. I'm also born and raised in Tallahassee. I'm currently living in Atlanta, but I consider myself Floridian at heart. um, I also really enjoy hiking and traveling. I've been to a number of different countries. So that's a little bit about who I am in this world. I'm really passionate about mental health, as you can probably derive from the bio that Nicole shared. So that's a little bit more about me. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yes, once a Florida girl, always a Florida girl. So,
Yes.
yes, 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 yes. Well, look, your mom put a whole host of resources on here. Look at there.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Gina. So y'all go
Yes.
check out these websites that Gina put up. My mom is on here, so hey mom, my sister's on here. Hey Shay. And we got Ozzy from Virginia Beach on the line. He is
Awesome.
also a clinician, a licensed clinician in the Virginia Beach area.
Awesome.
So thank you all for being here. So let's talk around generational trauma. What's your definition of generational trauma?
Yes. So I get asked this question a lot, like how do we define it? What does it look like? All those sorts of things. But I often find it really helpful to start with just plain old trauma
Okay.
before we start to talk about what it looks like at the generational level. So when we think about trauma, we often think about like the physical sense of trauma, right? Like there is a trauma wing in the hospital, and that's like a head injury or something like that. And those physical impacts to the body, those are things that significantly change and impact our functioning. When we talk about emotional or psychological trauma, it's a very similar thing. It is defined as an event or a series of an event or series of events that significantly impact our ability to function within our lives and our relationships. So that can be occupationally at our jobs or in school if we're talking about children or adolescents.
Mm-hmm.
It could impact our relationships, our activities of daily living, just something that significantly impacts our functioning in our lives and in society. And the key word there is significantly because that could look different for different people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Two people can experience the same traumatic event and then they come out with different types of effects and different types of behaviors following that traumatic event, right? So it's a very individual experience. So I've shared all of that about trauma, like at the individual level, to kind of preface this conversation about generational trauma and how we consider how these changes in individual persons impact how a person might interact with, say, their children, or
Mm-hmm.
even if they're a teacher, their students, right? Or how they might interact with other children in their lives. And so we often think about how those effects can be passed down socially, but there's also this biological or epigenetic component as well. So there are a number of different studies. I'm a huge research nerd. I'm a PhD candidate. I do research, so I won't get into those things. But there are lots of studies that that touch on how trauma is passed down biologically. And then we see the socio-emotional effects as well in the counseling room. So there is like a nature and nurture thing going on.
Okay.
Trauma can be passed down through the way that we interact with each other, as well as through the expression of our genes. So this might look like, oftentimes with the definition, I like to give an example. So for example, generational trauma might look like a family discussing feelings as a sign of weakness. And that can lead to very like superficial or negative relationships. And we can trace that back generations and generations. If we're talking about Black folks in the United States, we can trace that back to slavery, right? Or even before that, our history doesn't begin with slavery. And so with generational trauma, I often like to say, we're not necessarily interested in identifying like the root cause of something. We know that it started somewhere, that it might not have started with us. And that's part of the title of today's conversation. But we acknowledge that it exists and that it is not our sole burden as individuals to carry, but it's an issue that is larger than ourselves, that exists within the system of our families.
So
some other example. Oh, go ahead.
Let me just interrupt you real quick there. Is it important for us to know or try to make sense of where it started from? How important is history?
Yeah, it can be helpful. I think oftentimes with something such as maybe like substance misuse, or even like incarceration, like it can be helpful to like identify those patterns within our families and kind of figure out the source of that. And it can kind of help us to work backwards to really just dig into like getting into why we are the way we are. I think with any sort of issue, whether it be with like a machine, like a car, same thing with a person, it's helpful to know the root cause of something. And I think it's the same thing with our families. It can be helpful. I do want to acknowledge that, not all individuals within family systems like have access to their biological family. So we might have some adoptees on the call, or like parents of adopted children. And we, like I mentioned, there is a biological component, but there also is that socio-emotional component as well. So just wanted to acknowledge that, folks may not even have access to those sorts of systems, but they might be going off of like the system that they're currently operating within. So it can be helpful. It's not totally necessary. I don't want people who don't have access to their family to feel like, well, I can't do this work.
Yeah, no, I just thought I'd throw that out there because I think maybe sometimes we can get stuck there. But the most important thing is that you are trying to do the work.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Uh-oh, I think I see Grandma. Hey, Ruby.
Hey, Grandma.
Thanks for tuning in. All right, so okay, you said it is that there is a nature and nurture piece of it. So let's talk around, I guess, the nature in terms of how it can be passed down.
Yes.
So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So you all might be familiar with maybe some research on like adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. They often use that acronym called ACEs to describe, traumatic things that happen to children in their childhood, and how that like affects how they might show up in school or at home, and how they, progress through their life. There are a lot of like predictive studies that show, children who have an ACEs score of X end up doing this, like that sort of thing. And I think that it's the same sort of idea when we think about, biological trauma. Like it's something that has been shown to change the expression of our genes. So epigenetics, so epi means like on top of. And so obviously when we're born, we have genes, those are our genes, but the way that our genes express themselves as we pass them on through offspring can be changed by trauma. So for example, there was a study conducted on the infants of children of war veterans. So these are like veterans who went off to war there, and they were in combat, and they have infant children. The infants of war veterans had an increased startle response. So if you make a sound, they would be more startled than an infant of someone who is not a combat veteran. So we see even at the infant level, obviously this is a very different kind of trauma. Like it's not as if clapping your hands and making a loud sound is super traumatic to an infant, but we just see how that changes the expression of genes. And it's really fascinating that we are able to observe that in human subjects, because there are a ton of non-human subjects regarding generational trauma and that sort of thing. So there's
Right.
tons of literature to support that. And like you said, that nature piece is there.
Okay. Now, Gina said that this is important for teachers too. We need to know this for students who just don't function well.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely. I think one, I just want to give a shout out to teachers because y'all have to deliver curriculum and prepare students for tests. And then you also have to like deal with their emotions. I want to give a hats off to all the teachers out there because there's a whole lot to consider in the classroom.
Indeed.
And mhm.
So my sister is a teacher, so she is also agreeing as well. So
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. We got one more family member. Your sister is out here.
Yes.
Proud of
Hi, Leah.
you. All right. So look, Team Ashlei is here tonight.
Love y'all.
Yes. So let's again, yeah, let's dig a little deeper. Dig a little deeper. So when you talk about this the genetics piece, but
Mhm.
and you gave a definition. Um I kind of wanted to know how racism, prejudice, discrimination, bias plays a role in generational trauma.
Yes, yeah. Thank you for that question. Like you mentioned earlier, I study generational trauma as it relates to Black communities and specifically Black women. So the answer is it plays a huge role. I will say too, I often get asked if like white individuals who maybe have more privileged identities, if they can experience generational trauma, and the answer is yes. It's not something that's unique to our communities, but it is something that a lot of folks have tied to the impact of slavery, the Jim Crow era, and et cetera. And there are a ton of empirical studies that kind of reveal the traumatic effects of systemic racism and prejudice and discrimination and bias and all those sorts of things. And it's often described as a chronic stress or a traumatic stress. So when you think of like PTSD or post traumatic stress disorder, right? Our DSM, the basically the book that we use to diagnose individuals, it'll say that PTSD has to follow a specific traumatic event. So like one moment in time or a series of events, right?
Okay.
But what do we do when, a person may not have experienced something traumatic, but it could be systemic racism, right? So it could be that they're experiencing health disparities and having trouble accessing mental health care. And that's a direct result of environmental racism and the zoning of their school and not having access to a mental health counselor, all those sorts of things. So the long story short, systemic racism impacts health disparities across the board, and mental and relational health is not exempt from that. I mentioned earlier the example about access to healthcare, and poverty is a big example of what this could look like within a community. So if there isn't proper access to healthcare, if folks are underinsured or uninsured, totally. The idea that if we are just focused on surviving, if we're just focused on keeping a roof over our heads and food in our stomachs, then it makes it hard for us to focus on these sorts of relational issues, right? I think there's this thing called Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
Mhm.
So if you are focused on those daily sorts of things, and it's harder to focus on, okay, how am I feeling today?
Right.
What is this trauma response, right? It's hard to, even if we bring it to the classroom, it's hard to focus on whatever math problem is on the board or whatever book that they're reading in literature class. So,
Mhm.
um, so yeah, it plays a humongous role. And like I said, individuals who may not be victims of systemic racism and discrimination, all those things, yes, they can still experience this, but similar to many other issues that plague our communities, systemic racism, makes it worse. It worsens this phenomenon. So
Right.
yeah.
So, this is we have seen, all the things as it relates to 2020. And I know I'm saying that very generically, but when I say all the things, I mean, there's been a boldness with people in their prejudice and their biases. And,
Mhm.
with the death of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, um,
Mhm.
Breonna Taylor, we've
Mhm.
seen some behaviors that I think we're kind of under the surface, but really came out in 2020, the summer of 2020 in particular. And so, it was a heavy time, I think, and still is to some extent, and then you put COVID on top of all of that. I mean, it started out with COVID, but with us, um, social distancing and being in place. And then when we could kind of come out, we kind of saw some really, I don't even know how to describe it, just disturbing behaviors from folks. And so it just, I think we also saw, white folks trying to make sure that they were okay, and that they weren't racist or prejudiced, or some folks kind of checking in with their Black friends or coworkers or what have you. That was a bit draining in some regards, because now maybe they're looking to you to kind of speak for all Black folks, and
Right.
you can't do that because we're not a monolith. And so while some of our experiences have been the same, they have also been different as well. So I don't know, just if you want to kind of speak to that, it's heavy. When I think about it, it's just a very heavy thing to talk about.
Yes, absolutely. And I feel like that can be a whole separate conversation as
It
well, but I
could.
want to kind of like tie it to the generational trauma
Yes.
conversation that we're having here, because I want to remind us that, generational trauma can go both ways, right? There are studies that have shown that when it came to um, victims or even survivors of school shootings, and like the trauma that the children experience impacted their parents, right? So we often think, oh, it's parents passing down trauma to their children or the effects of trauma, but it could be the other way around as well. And when I think about like the current socio-political climate in our country, and everything that occurred last summer, it really makes me think and wonder about like what the impact this will have in the future. So that's the kind of the conundrum of being a generational trauma researcher. Like it takes a whole lot of time. Oftentimes I feel like I'm chipping away at like a really big rock, and my little chip is so tiny, and it's just a small part of the larger conversation. But these are the things that we study, that we'll study in generations to come. And so, yeah, I just wanted to bring that to the trauma conversation and just acknowledge that we were having this conversation backstage before we started, Nicole, but our access to social media and the things that we are able to view vicariously through others, it can be a blessing and a curse, right? It's really great to have all these access to resources. So, for example, all of the websites that my mom shared in the chat not too long ago, those are, I think a lot of those initiatives may have started on social media, and it's great that people now have access to these things. But by the same token, we're exposed to, videos of police shootings and just all types of crime and horror across the country and even the world. And so I think it's important for us to be mindful of the information that we're taking in, being mindful about curating a timeline that contributes to our wellness, but also helps us to stay informed and connected to our loved ones. Social media is social in that regard. I think we have to forget that too. But I just want to acknowledge that these generational effects, these are things that we're studying, and we're going to see what this might look like in the future. But there is definitely something there. There's generational cohort effects for pretty much any big phenomenon or historical event. And I think that this will be no different.
Right. So in terms of, and Rashonda kind of put it up, generational trauma, how it affects one's mental behavior, or actually just their behavior, period, because, the trauma, I guess we internalize it or try to process it mentally, and then what does that show up looking like? Yeah.
Right. So I wanted to share, this is like I forget where it came from. I think it's like a fable or something like that, but there's a story of, a daughter learning how to cook from a mom, and the daughter, she's preparing like a pot roast, and the mom is kind of walking her through how she prepares a pot roast, and the mom cuts off both ends of the pot roast and puts it into the pot, puts it into the oven. And then, years later, the daughter, who is now the mother, is now teaching her daughter, how to prepare the pot roast. and she cuts off the ends of the pot roast and puts it
Right.
into the pot. And the daughter asked her, "Why do you cut off the ends of the pot roast?" And she says, "Well, that's just what my mom taught me."
Mm-hmm.
And so she said, "You can go ask your grandmother why we cut off the ends of the pot roast." So the daughter then goes and asks her grandmother, and the grandmother says, "Oh, I just cut off the ends of the pot roast because it was too big to fit in the pan."
Mm-hmm.
So here the mom is thinking that she's cutting them off for some,
Right.
reason to do with food safety or preparation or something like that. And, even though her pan is big enough to fit the whole pot roast, she was following that behavior of her mother of cutting the ends
Exactly.
off the pot roast. And so that's just an example of how that can, obviously that's more of a fictional example, but think about that in relation to how we interact with each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
Think about a parent who may have grown up in poverty and they develop these behaviors to survive, right? And then once they're in a better position, um, they are not able to shed those behaviors because it's protective. It's a safety mechanism. It's a defense mechanism for them to keep themselves emotionally and physically safe. And they
Mm-hmm.
teach those things to their children. Their child may not have any experience living in poverty, but they might be engaging in those same maybe hoarding behaviors. We see that a lot in children, whether it be money or resource hoarding. And so that's how it might show up for some individuals. It could unfortunately look like substance use and misuse. That's something that also has a very biological component to it. A lot of those diseases are unfortunately hereditary.
Mm-hmm.
And we might see children learning, whether it be, visibly from their parents or family members, engaging in recreational drugs and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a more concrete example that folks might identify with. But, the pot roast story, I enjoy telling that one, as well as what poverty can look like in those behaviors that are passed down, and even down to substance use and misuse. Domestic violence and interpersonal violence is another big one. Folks kind of falling into patterns that they're familiar with. We have this thing in family counseling called homeostasis. If you're a scientist or anything like that, you might be familiar with that in terms of molecules, but it's a tendency to want to stay the same. Even if we have a desire to change, it feels comfortable for us to stay in the same patterns. And we see that a lot in families as well. When one person, I see this a lot when I have individual clients, is when one person wants to use their coping skills and do something healthy and change and do better. The rest of the system is like, hold up, no, we're staying the same. This is comfortable. I don't know what you're doing, what your counselor taught you, but this is the system. This is what we're sticking to. And it can be really difficult to change that system. And so that's what we kind of work to change the homeostasis when I do generational trauma counseling and that sort of thing. So that was a really long answer to your question, but I wanted to share that, and I got some feedback.
No, that was good. Everybody's saying you rocked it with the examples that you're giving, and these are really great points. We want to be kind of mindful of what those behaviors might be, what the subsequent behaviors will be as a result of the trauma that the generational trauma that is being experienced. So yeah. And I know you did your study, and we're not going to talk about that specifically, but I don't know if you can share some examples of generational trauma that maybe you've run across.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have plenty, both clinically and from the research standpoint. And I it's unfortunate, but this is just a growing interest of mine. But I'm thinking specifically about someone that I encountered in a previous research study that I conducted that is hopefully soon being published. But basically, this individual, when I had interviewed her for this study, she did not have any contact with her mother, so they were not on speaking terms. And she was in college at the time. She had 2 young children of her own, and just didn't really have a close relationship with her mom. She was one of those kids that made it to high school graduation, moved out, and just kind of became estranged and didn't really have a whole lot of connection. There was not really a close relationship there from the beginning. And she shared with me that she had recently escaped a experience with domestic violence, right? So her partner, the father of her children, had been physically violent with her, and she recently escaped the situation. And she shared with me that when she finally did connect with her mom, and was explaining to her mom, what she had gone through, her mom told her, "Oh, I went through this too." And they had not had one conversation about it. Even though this was something that the mother experienced while the my participant in research was within the home, it was something that she was shielded from, that she didn't really have knowledge of. So that's an example of how even if you don't see it or you don't have any knowledge of it, it's like in our bodies. There's a book called The Body Keeps the Score, and it is so true. Our body does keep the score of the things that we go through. I know there's often like a phrase within our communities, I don't look like what I've been through. Right. And I love to use that example because we always say Black don't crack. And again, I don't look like what I've been through, but I always encourage people to examine the inside. Like, what do you feel like? Right. You might, be wrinkle free. You might not look like what you've been through, but what do you feel like? And how are you treating your children? And what types of relationships do you have? Because again, it's not all about looks. So I use that example to share that even if you haven't been exposed to a certain traumatic situation, just know that, patterns are happening and it's important to have these conversations. And that was something else that came from my research study, was just how just talking about it can encourage people to repair those relationships and encourage people to really get to the root, like what we said earlier, get to the root of the generational trauma and begin that healing process. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So Marjorie is sharing some things that I'm gonna just read some of it. She said her siblings and her have had to deal in their own ways with generational trauma. Picture as a child having traumatic experiences surrounding you without any explanations afterwards from an adult. I'm trying to break this by having my daughter participate in therapy during adolescence so she is healed and whole as an adult. I'm surprised at the pushback I've gotten from the community at getting her mental health counseling for her and giving her age appropriate answers to questions. Wow. Well, all right, hold on, Solomon. I'm gonna get to you. So tell me what your thoughts are around that.
Yes, thank you for sharing that, Marjorie. And I want to commend you for being willing to take the initiative to get your daughter, I think it is, daughter, the help that you feel like she needs. I will say stigma is a big issue within not only our community, but the world in general. I think that mental health is just still not as acknowledged or regarded as physical health. And I think that that's changing with social media. And I think the younger generation is doing a really good job at destigmatizing mental health. But I feel like as a community, like we're still not there yet. We're getting there, but it's not there. So I'm really sorry that you're having that experience and that pushback. I also commend you for, again, breaking that cycle and, seeing that, I had this experience where someone didn't explain something to me. I didn't like how that felt. So let me do something different with my daughter. That takes a lot. It's hard to do that. It's hard to be set in a way and know something, and that's all that that's the experience that you have, and then make a conscious decision to do something different, do something unknown that feels different to you. So again, kudos there. Nice. I will say I always like to use the metaphor when we talk about generational healing. I love to use the metaphor of like a big ship. So I think a lot of people expect for generational healing to look like you turn a car, like you can cut your wheel and just make your left turn and you're going about your way, right? But I think it's more like a ship. Like, it's not easy to turn. If you think of a big cruise ship, they have to, it takes, I don't know the exact amount of time. I'm no captain of a ship or anything like that, but I know that there's multiple different steps they have to take. There's a team of people. They have to this person's looking out on this direction. It's multiple different steps in it. We're making small turns to complete that full 90-degree, left turn that's happening. So think of it like that. Think of it like the ship. I imagine that in your conversations with your daughter and in the work that she's doing in therapy, that she's getting a message that this is important, and that's something that she will pass down to children that she may have, or youth that she might interact with in her time, and that is how we turn the ship. And so you are doing your part, and you're instilling in her to do her part, and that's what contributes to healthy families and communities. So kudos, and I hope that continues to go well, and that your daughter continues and builds on the work that you're already starting and that you're doing.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Marjorie, for sharing. So I got to bring up Solomon's comment, which I was going to mention when we were talking a little earlier about critical race theory. He says there's an awakening that is taking place. Trials, trauma, tribulations African Americans have had to endure are being placed on a world stage, i.e., critical race theory, etc. This is why we are witnessing backlash through the government, Republicans, that is trying to put the brakes on this study. So, you know, I I just kind of started looking into critical race theory, even though I've been kind of hearing snippets about it over the past few months, but most recently, and it's almost as if to negate that certain things happen, you know, and so that just seems so counterproductive and so like you just ignoring people, in their experience. Is almost to say that no, we're going to deny that these things happen and they're just going to magically go away and we don't have to talk about them anymore, right?
Right. I saw a meme the other day. I'm a millennial, so I communicate in memes sometimes. But I did see a meme the other day that said critical race theory is basically American history, and although that's not the literal definition of critical race theory, there are lots of like tenets and principles and it's a there's books and books on CRT.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially, it is that it's acknowledging the history of the United States and how that's impacted how Black and Brown folks exist and operate within our society today. And I'll always bring it to generational trauma. It impacts all of that. If we have a government that's saying, you can't teach this, or this is not valid, or this did not happen, and they're essentially gaslighting our experiences. How does that translate when I'm in the counseling room trying to tell this person, like, the trauma that you're experiencing, it seems generational. It seems like this is a family issue that, has fallen onto you, and you're in this office now. And they're battling with messages they may have heard from school about, this isn't real. You didn't experience this. So it is a systemic issue. And I think that is a big reason why I advocate for parents to not rely on the public school system to educate their kids. I think that's something my mom did really well, of like adjuncting our education with stuff from home. If they were taught, they said, oh, slaves or enslaved Africans were indentured service, my mom would be like, no, they were not. They were enslaved against their will, like that sort of thing. So we can't always depend on those folks to educate us properly and equip our kids with what they need in order to survive, and not just survive, but thrive in this world. So it's unfortunate. It definitely impacts the generational trauma sphere as well. But our experiences are valid. We know that these things occur. We don't need them to validate those experiences. That's a big reason why we have community, and we support each other.
Right. So Lynette said the Florida legislature, which actually just started yesterday, is going to vote it on not talking about CRT this session, calling it divisive when it's actually truth. That just really blows me. Anyway.
That's unfortunate. Yes.
Very, very unfortunate. So how do we, well, let me back up because I think Ruby had a question. She said, is there an easier way to detect generational trauma? It can be in disguise for some people. So can it be a disguise? Can it be undetectable, if you will?
Absolutely. This was something else that came up in my past research study, but a lot of folks just didn't know because there were so many family secrets, right? And that's a common thing within our families and communities. And a part of it, I don't want to vilify keeping secrets, because sometimes it can be for the betterment of the child. Obviously, if there's a 4 or 5-year-old child, they don't need to know everything that's going on with Uncle so-and-so, right? Once they're age appropriate and they're able to have those conversations, and that's when we should share. But we get, to where everybody's adults and there's still not being like honest conversations had, it can be, like my grandma said, really hard to detect. I would say a lot of these things start with conversation. So that's why I really love the premise of this talk show. But I would even encourage each of you to go home and have these conversations with your families. I know for me, this was something that really hit me when it came to my husband's father. So he recently passed away. And before he passed away, I had the chance to have a lot of conversations with him about his childhood. And those are things that, we just typically don't ask about. And that's something that I want to do better with as well, with my family members. But just really having conversations, even if they consent to it, recording those conversations, right? Because sometimes when when people go, all we have of them is pictures and videos and audio and that sort of thing. So if, they're telling a story about their childhood or how they grew up or things that they've experienced, it could be helpful to record those conversations to be able to share with future generations. So it starts with conversations. I also,
So let me pause you right there.
mm-hmm.
You are speaking my language. That is something that I encourage my friends, especially during the holidays, especially when they're going to see the seniors in their family, to try to video record them if they can, but if not, at bare minimum, try to audio record them. Just
Yes.
use your phone, turn on that audio and ask them, what's your first
Mm-hmm.
memory? How did you meet your spouse?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me about your first job, or, just any and everything. Once you
Mm-hmm.
get them going, you probably can't stop them. So
Right.
just get them to start talking about stuff. What was your experience like in the military, or being the big sister or the big brother or the little sister, little
Mm-hmm.
brother, or whatever. So just talk to them, get them to talk to you, and
Mm-hmm.
record them giving those oral histories.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's a big one. I also, one of my favorite interventions to do with my clients, and I've also done this in research as well, is family genograms. And so if you're not familiar, a genogram is pretty much like a family tree, but it's where we kind of identify patterns. And it can look like anything. Oftentimes in career counseling, they do like a career genogram where you kind of identify the lineage of different careers and career paths in your family. But we can do the same thing with generational trauma. We can talk about what folks have been through in our family. And it's kind of fascinating and at the same time sad. So there's some mixed feelings there, to be able to see a pattern of substance misuse or abuse, or to be able to see a pattern of incarceration or a pattern of depression. Um, and really understand where that comes from. If you see that it's mostly with the women, right? Or maybe it's that the women are reporting it and the men aren't, and they're not really saying it, but they could be experiencing it too. So that's something else to dig into. But this genogram really gives us a visual to work off of, and it's really cool to see. And
And
another thing that
it's called a
go ahead.
genogram. It's called
Genogram, yes.
Okay. Okay.
Yes. And another thing I do, when I do this with clients, we get down, we color code it, it's multiple pages. It's something we go back to, they bring it home and share it with their family, and they talk about it and bring it back in session, and we talk about it some more. So it's a whole ordeal. And I find that it's really helpful just for visualizing those patterns. And then something else I like to do to help empower my clients is for them to draw the future generation. So for my clients who are not yet parents or don't wish to be parents, they can kind of talk about what they hope that, the future of their family looks like. They
Ashlei,
can also,
hold on one moment. Somebody asked that you
sure.
spell genogram, and I'll put it in the chat. So spell it for us.
Yeah, so Lynette has the first part correct. So Geno, and then so GenoGram.
All together.
Genogram. Yes,
Okay.
all in one word.
Got it.
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you for that. So like I mentioned, I really like to help empower clients, and so they can identify what they want for future generations to look like. And they can also not only identify patterns of trauma, but identify patterns of healing. That's my favorite thing to do within my family, because in my family tree, there are lots of trials and tribulations. When I think about my mom and like all the changes that she made, that positively impacted our lives. I think about what Marjorie mentioned earlier about, putting her daughter in therapy and making conscious choices to make different decisions. Like those are things I think about when I think about my mom and grandma. So we can identify things that folks have done well so that we can build on that. So that can be helpful as well with the genogram. But yeah, I'm a big fan of those, and I do those in session often, and I encourage you all to do that as well.
Okay. Nice. All right. So I heard record family members, especially the elders. I heard genograms. All right.
Yes, and I also going back to the conversations and the recording piece. I think that kind of tip was aimed at younger folks to talk and record with our elders, but it can also be the other way around, right? I think that oftentimes children are not given voices and platforms within our families. We're told to be seen and not heard, and that sort of thing. But it can also be really helpful for older generations to converse with younger ones to better understand what they're experiencing. We know that, someone growing up today in 2022 does not have the same childhood experience as someone who grew up in 1960, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so it can be really helpful for those relationships where it's being mutual, right? Oftentimes, like children are feeling like if they don't reach out, then it won't happen, right? And that's not okay. It should feel like a mutual, conversation that is wanted by both parties. And so I do encourage elders to also reach out to the youth in their family, and connect with them and get to know them, because they have lives and friends and ways of being and all those sorts of things. Just like you do, like you did when you were younger as well. So it can be a two-way street for sure.
All right. I like that. I like that a lot. So when should, I mean, because we kind of talked about generational trauma maybe being hidden, um, but if it's maybe not so hidden, when should someone seek professional help as it relates to it?
Yeah, so I always say the sooner the better. Often people ask me like, okay, I've got generational trauma, but to what extent do I really need to like seek professional help for it?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I often like to use kind of parallels of like physical, I guess, like medical concerns, because I think that people kind of understand those more, right? So, for example, like if you have a toothache that's bothering you, and anybody that's had a toothache before, you know that it is going to rock your world. It's going to change the course of your day and your life until you get that tooth taken care of, right? If it's hurting you so bad to the point where you need medical attention, and it's something that you can't go without thinking about in the day. You can't talk to somebody without thinking about it. You're avoiding this person because you don't want to address it.
Mm-hmm.
That's problematic. And that is
Mm-hmm.
affecting you in deeper ways than we can acknowledge. And that might even be at some point a medical issue, right?
Right.
Um, I had a client discover that there was a pattern of stomach issues in her family, and then there was also the same kind of lineage of anxiety. So that made me wonder, are those things connected, right? Physical
Mm-hmm.
health is mental health, and then vice versa. Um, so I always say, the sooner the better. If it's impacting you significantly, then yes. Also, if you find yourself being, again, so avoidant that you're not able to like coexist with people and that sort of thing, then that could be helpful to seek professional help for that. And then the last thing I'll leave with is that I'm talking more about like relationships now, but obviously these things impact our like individual, like personal mental health,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I always tell people, you want to be able to choose your counselor. Like if you, there are two ways you can go about this, right? You can say like, okay, hey, I'm going through something and I really want to seek professional help for this, and you seek a counselor on your own, and that's your choice. Or you get to a point where you're so overwhelmed to the point where you're feeling suicidal, right?
Mm.
You're feeling like you are bubbling up and you just can't hold this in anymore. And then now you have to be involuntarily committed somewhere, right? And at that point, you don't choose your counselor, you go to the hospital, right? And
Mm.
so I always tell people it's better to engage in more preventative care and be more proactive about your mental health than it is to
Mhm.
wait until it's too late and you're to the point where you're having to be admitted, which is not the end of the world. Um,
Mhm.
but again, it's a much more pleasant experience for you to remain in control of your treatment.
Mm. So, Rashonda had a question, and I think you've addressed it, but I'm gonna put it up anyway. She said, "General trauma that is not hidden. How and when is it recognized and treated?"
Yeah, so I would say that thank you for that question, Rashonda. I think that this might differ from family to family, from
Mhm.
person to person. So, and I think too, it depends on like maybe where people are at in lifespan. I think that oftentimes, especially like kids that have access to kind of like the mental health side of TikTok or Instagram, like they might be seeing
Mhm.
those memes that us counselors post and infographics and things like that. And they might say, like, that feels really familiar. I identify with that. I have that.
Mhm.
What do I do about that? Right. We know that kids, can't go to counseling on their own. They need parent permission slip and all those sorts of things, someone to pay for it and all of that. So I think it really depends on who the individual is, where they are in life. It might also look like if it's really like a relational issue, maybe it's like a one-on-one sort of thing that, like for example, if you really want to seek counseling alongside your mom, right? It might take, getting your mom on board in that process and like finding a counselor that is willing to work with the both of you and that fits for the both of you. So I think that is more so on an individual basis.
Mhm.
Um, and in terms of the treatment, in terms of recognition, I think that looks different for different people. I think that conversations like this one Even I always talk about social media, and that's the millennial in me, but there are so many like awesome counselors, mental health professionals out there that post really engaging and informative content. Although that's not a replacement for a relationship with a licensed professional, it can be a good starting point for increasing your awareness of what that is, and that's where that recognition comes from. So it depends on the person. I'd say all that to say it depends.
Okay, gotcha. That's fine. All right. Solomon had a comment about two things he's learned, and that is our Caucasian counterparts do not like to be told who they are and what they have done psychologically, physically, etc., to African Americans. And unfortunately, our ancestors have passed down these traumas to the generations that have come after them. Not trying to play the blame game, but a lot of our trauma stem from not being able to get the proper psychological help, economical relief, justice, etc. So,
Absolutely, yes.
agreed.
There's a book that I read. It's you all might have heard of it, but it's called Post Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joy DeGrasse. She's a clinical social worker, and in it, she touches on obviously the experience of generational trauma for African Americans, but there's also a quote in there where she says, if trauma can be passed down within our families, certainly hate can be passed down in theirs. Like, this is the reason why we have trauma. It stems from the transatlantic slave trade and back. And so I think that, Solomon, you're absolutely right. It's difficult to have these conversations. That kind of ties back to the conversation we were having about CRT earlier. But it is a delicate dance and balance in terms of like what those conversations look like. So again, we can, spend time and energy, digging to the root of this issue. Or we can choose to connect with our family members and our loved ones and work on like building our immediate extended family, kinship ties, and those sorts of things within ourselves. So I work from the mindset that, I don't necessarily need validation from those folks to say like, yes, we did this. Yes, this is the harm we caused, because I experience it, I live it, and I feel it every day.
Right.
But I imagine that at a systemic level, like we want that validation, when it comes to like policies and things like that. So that it's like you said, it's unfortunate. It exists, and that's still a big issue. When we talk about generational trauma for us, so what does that look like for them? Like how we got here because of something they did, right? And that they continue to do in the systems that they created that continue to perpetuate these issues that we experience. So you're absolutely right.
And hopefully we will, through these conversations and others, begin to change that for the future generations. I mean, like what Marjorie is doing.
Exactly.
Yeah. So Grandma wants to know, will most healthcare provider companies pay for this type of counseling?
Yes. So generational trauma counseling it's not necessarily like a specialty that like requires a special degree or like a training program or anything like that. Like if you're familiar with like EMDR therapy and stuff like that, it's not like that. It's simply you're going to mental health counseling and wanting to talk about generational trauma. So I always encourage folks who are my clients, maybe they may be going on somewhere else. I encourage them to find someone that is familiar with family systems and family dynamics. And this can be through licensed professional counselors in Florida. They're called licensed mental health counselors, or through licensed marriage and family therapists, just folks that have a background and training in this. And typically you can bill it just like a regular session. So oftentimes insurance companies, they're not as interested in what you're talking about. They just want to know that it's necessary. And as counselors, we are trained on how to justify the sessions that we have with our clients. So yes, this type of counseling could be absolutely be paid for by providers.
So I will follow up with that and comment, Ruby, that in this area, in the Tallahassee area, a number of the Black and Brown clinicians do not accept insurance. They do, pay as you go. And some of them do offer sliding scales. A few of them offer insurance, but for the most part, most of them do not. But if you are looking for some of those resources, Ruby, I'll be happy to share those with you. All right.
Mhm.
Let's see. Solomon was responding to Lynette about the white fragility. I think in order to understand and be able to deal with the effect, we have to understand what caused the effect. So, yeah,
Mhm.
which is kind of goes back to what I was asking about um, history. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Good deal. Let me see. Was there anything else that we wanted to chat about? I think we covered the tips, and I'll just kind of go over those again real quickly. Of course, we talked about recording our family members, right?
Mhm.
Talked about the genograms.
Mhm.
Genograms. Okay. Anything else that we might use to get started, be active workers on our healing?
Yes. So whenever I talk about generational healing, I always want to plug the importance of taking care of yourself. So someone
Mhm.
in the chat mentioned they're enjoying my metaphor, so I will keep it coming.
Okay.
But if you all have heard of the metaphor, like when you're flying on a plane and they say make sure that you put your mask on before you help someone else.
Mhm.
And if you're not familiar with the reasoning behind that, I'll leave that up to you to look it up because I'm looking at our time here. But understanding our own traumas, generational traumas, what triggers us, what we might be subconsciously passing on to the next generation. It doesn't have to be your own children, but just the next generation in general. Um, Understanding all those things can help us to make better decisions so that we are setting ourselves up and future generations up for a better outcome and path.
Mhm.
So again, this might be with the help of a mental health professional, like seeking professional counseling or therapy,
Mhm.
or you might really be into and able to engage in like self-help books and journaling and things like that. Whatever that healing journey looks like for you, you have to understand yourself and know what it is you might be passing on, right? Um, and so I always encourage folks to take care of themselves first because when we have healthy individuals, we are better able to have healthy families and better able to have healthy communities. So in addition to the genograms and talking to other folks, take care of yourself, right?
Mhm.
Um, the other thing I will add are a couple of resources that I enjoy. I love reading. I'm kind of getting back into reading from being a student for so long. But there's a book by Ya Ghazi. It's called Homegoing, and it's a fictional book, but it is one of my favorites. It honestly kind of got me into helped get me into doing this work. But it follows a lineage of two African girls who had like a very different fate. One of them married a slave master, and one of them went into slavery and went to the United States. So it's a really, really interesting book. I also see The Body Keeps the Score in the chat. That's a really good one.
Mhm.
Also, there's a book called It Didn't Start With You, and it touches on the biological kind of side of generational trauma. So that can be really helpful to understand, especially when we think about kids.
Okay.
I also mentioned Post Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joy DeGruy.
Mhm.
Um, My Grandmother's Hands is also a really good book. I'm actually in the middle of that one right now. I haven't finished it yet, but it's good so far, and I've heard really good
Okay.
things about it. So I encourage you to read up on these things. I also encourage folks to, I love when my clients tell me, hey, I saw this meme or this infographic from this other counselor online. I want to talk about this. Or I read this book,
Mhm.
or this was a prompt in my journal that kind of got me thinking I want to think about that. So you can have these resources and then bring them into therapy to help have a professional help you to process and unpack, what you're reading and what you're journaling about and that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
So I definitely recommend those books,
So you just
both
gonna have to
fiction and
give us a
nonfiction.
book list, ma'am. You just gonna have to
Yes,
give us a book list that we can post. Okay.
I can definitely do that. Not a
Okay. Good.
problem.
Good. 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 All right. Well, I think you have covered it. I mean, you have broken it down for us. We've even covered critical race theory a little bit and some on social media. So this has been good. Now, if you all have found this to be beneficial, give me a thumbs up, a heart, something. Just let us know. Let us know. Let us know. I didn't
Yes.
I didn't I didn't ask too many interactive questions. Actually, I didn't really ask anything of you all tonight. So I like some interaction, but you all have been doing well with the
Mhm.
comments. So thank you, my Tati. She's in New York. Appreciate you being on here.
Yes. Thank y'all.
Oh, nice. So thank y'all for the comments. So Ashlei, I know you are busy working on your in school and finishing up your coursework and whatnot. But how can folks connect with you?
Yeah, so excuse me. I am on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter as Counselor Ashlei.
Mm-hmm.
So you can connect with me there. I also have a blog site that I will get back to publishing things on very soon,
Okay.
counselorashley.com, but you can view some of my previous blog posts there. I
Mm-hmm.
also, thank you for putting that in the chat.
Yeah.
I'm working on my dissertation study, which I'm waiting on approval from the IRB right now.
It's
And once
coming.
that gets
It's coming.
cleared,
It's coming. It's coming.
yes, once that gets cleared, I will be conducting a support group study. So I'll be getting some Black women together to have a support group for generational trauma. So if you
Nice.
are a millennial and you identify as a Black woman and you're interested in participating in my study, please reach out to me. And once I get that approval, I'll send you more information. Um,
Okay.
so, so
Cool.
yeah, that's where you can find me, Counselor Ashley, on the socials and upcoming dissertation study.
Nice. 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 Well, congratulations. Oh, there's hubby right there.
Hey.
Appreciate it. Thank you for lending her to us for an hour, hubby. Thank you. Thank you. So I really appreciate you sharing your wealth of knowledge tonight. You really put it well. I think people really got a lot of it. There were at least 3 counselors on here: Jamil, Isis, and uh Ozzy. So and I think they all chimed in at one point or another to you know to commend you for your work. So thank you, thank you, thank you. That's good because look, they've already gone through. Look, or some of
Yes.
them are still getting their hours, but many of them have been counseling for quite some time now. So yeah,
Awesome. Well, thank you all. I see a lot of the comment messages in the comment
uh,
section. Thank you so much for those messages. I'm thankful to share this space with you, and definitely reach out if you'd like to connect.
absolutely.
And I wish you all well in your
Yeah,
generational
yeah,
healing journey. You can
yeah.
do this. Turn that ship. Do your part to turn the ship.
Yes, I like that analogy. Turn that ship. It's slow, but it's intentional and it's precise. We trying to make sure we don't crash while we're doing that.
Yes.
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 So before we go, we have some dynamic speakers next week. So we are here every Monday and Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. So please come back, share this platform with others. Lynette said provide the book list. So Ashley, you got to get me that list of books, okay? So
I will.
put me something together and I will definitely post it.
Okay. I'll
All
put it in our
right.
chat.
So I want to encourage you all to, if you need some mental health, mental counseling, some counseling, there are resources available here in Tallahassee and probably wherever you are as well. So look into that. I will be posting more information about the counseling services at Lincoln Center and at FSU Behavioral Health Clinic. They also have low and no cost services. And let's keep this conversation going. Let's keep this conversation going. And then follow us. That helps. Well, Ashley don't need no help because she's a millennial star. But look, likes, follows, comments. Y'all know I'm in your
Yes.
DM, sending you links to the shows and flyers about the show that's coming up for the day. So please share. That really helps us. Really, really helps us. All right. Thank you again, Ashley. Thank you again, viewers. Really appreciate you all. Have a great holiday weekend, and we'll see you next week. All right.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.